The first splash of wine hit the paper at exactly 4:15 in the afternoon. My sister Jessica did not knock it over by accident. She poured it on purpose. She stood over my 6-year-old son, Jacob, tilting her glass of Pinot Noir with a careless, almost bored kind of precision. Jacob had spent 3 days on that watercolor painting. It was a peaceful landscape of the lake outside our parents' cabin, something he had been carefully working on as a gift for his grandfather. Now a dark red stain spread across the blue sky, bleeding into the paint, soaking the paper, warping the edges, and turning his work into a soggy, ruined mess. "He needs to learn the world doesn't care about his little doodles," Jessica said, her voice slurred but strangely steady. "It's taking up space on the table, and honestly, Jacob needs to toughen up." She finished the glass, set it down right on the wet paper with a heavy thud, and looked around the room like she expected applause. My Uncle Mark, stretched out on the sofa, slapped his knee and laughed. "That's a $50 lesson right there, kid. Toughen up or get eaten." The laughter spread through the cabin like something sharp and ugly. My mother chuckled in that nervous way she always did when she wanted everyone to pretend nothing was wrong. My cousin smirked. Jacob froze, staring at the destroyed painting, his small hands trembling above the table as if touching it would make it real. "Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would genuinely love to know who is here with us and who's part of this community." I didn't scream. I didn't rush for napkins. I didn't even move for the first few seconds. I just watched my son. Jacob did not make a sound. His shoulders shook and his face turned a mottled, painful red, but he didn't cry out. He bit his lip until it went pale, compressing himself into the chair like he was trying to become smaller than his own body. He wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for invisibility. He was waiting for the laughter to stop, hoping that if he stayed quiet enough, the predator would lose interest and move on. And in that silence, I saw it with terrifying clarity. I saw the invisible chain forming around his neck. It was the same chain I had worn for 29 years, the chain that taught me to stay quiet, to be convenient, to swallow anger so I wouldn't disturb the peace. I was watching my son learn the fawn response in real time. He was learning that his pain was entertainment to the people who were supposed to love him. He was learning that his job was to smile through humiliation so the adults would not feel uncomfortable. He was learning to become me. The realization hit like a physical blow, colder than the lake outside and heavier than the rain clouds gathering over the trees. I wasn't just watching him get bullied. I was watching him inherit my trauma. I was watching my family hand him a legacy of silence, a learned instinct to apologize for existing, a life pattern where he would shrink so other people could feel big. If I did not break the chain right then, in that exact moment, he would carry it into adulthood. He would grow up saying sorry when he wasn't wrong. He would hesitate before taking up space. He would second-guess his own feelings and call them too much. I looked at my father, David. He sat at the head of the table with his hands folded over his empty plate. His face looked like stone to anyone who didn't know him, but I knew him. I saw the whiteness of his knuckles. I saw the muscle in his jaw twitch. The air in the cabin felt electric, heavy with decades of swallowed words. I stood up. The chair scraped harshly against the wood floor, the sound slicing through the laughter like a knife. I didn't move to clean anything. I didn't ask for a towel. I walked around the table and stood between Jessica and Jacob, using my body like a shield to block her view of him. I didn't look at the wine. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to fix it. I didn't feel the old reflex to smooth the moment over, to make a joke, to keep the peace. I felt something colder and clearer. It wasn't rage. It was accounting. It was the calm final feeling of a bridge burning down and knowing you are done paying interest on a debt you never owed. "You enjoyed that," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was flat and clinical. "You enjoyed watching a 6-year-old create something, and you enjoyed destroying it." Jessica rolled her eyes and poured herself another glass from the bottle on the sideboard. Her movements were loose and arrogant, like this was entertainment. "Oh, Sarah, don't be so dramatic. It's paper," she said. I did him a favor. Now he can learn to do something useful instead of making messes. Useful, I repeated, and the word tasted like iron. The room went silent. Jessica's smirk faltered, and her glass paused halfway to her lips. My mother gasped. That sharp inhale that always meant panic was rising inside her. I didn't blink. I wasn't managing chaos like I used to at work, trying to keep things smooth so nobody snapped. I was a mother watching a predator, and I was done negotiating. I looked at my father again. He hadn't moved, but his eyes shifted from the table to me. Before I could say anything else, my mother, Susan, rushed in. But she didn't go to Jacob. She didn't hug him. She didn't even look at his face. She grabbed napkins and started scrubbing the table frantically, like the stain was the real emergency. "Oh, Jessica, you're so clumsy," she chirped, voice high and tight, vibrating with that desperate energy she used when she tried to force happiness into existence. She kept wiping the wood and ignored the ruined painting completely. Then she turned to me with a stretched smile and pleading eyes. "Sarah, don't make a face. It was an accident. We can buy him a coloring book, a nice one, with stickers. Let's just have a nice dinner, please. It's Labor Day. We're family." I watched her, and something in me shifted. The pity I usually carried for her evaporated. I realized she wasn't confused. She wasn't helpless. She was addicted. She was addicted to the illusion of a happy family, and she would pay any price to keep it. The problem was she never paid the price herself. She taxed everyone else. She taxed the good children, the quiet ones, the ones who wouldn't scream. She sacrificed our dignity to appease the monster because Jessica was the only one who threatened to burn the house down. Susan would let Jacob bleed just to keep the carpet clean. "Exactly," Jessica said, emboldened by our mother's defense. She leaned back and swirled her wine. "He's too soft. Sarah babies him. I'm teaching him how the real world works." That was it. The final thread snapped. My father stood up. Not quickly. He rose with the slow, creaking heaviness of an old building finally giving way after years of pressure. He walked to the mantel where a rustic wooden sign hung that said, "Family is forever" in cursive script. He stared at it for a long second, then turned to Susan. "You wiped the table," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You didn't check on the boy. You worried about the wood stain." Susan froze with a wine-soaked napkin in her hand. "David, stop being dramatic. I'm just trying to," she started. "You're trying to keep the peace," he interrupted. "But there is no peace, Susan. There is just silence, and I am done paying for it." He looked down at his left hand and twisted his gold wedding band. It had been on his finger for 40 years, tight, buried into the flesh. He walked to the kitchen sink, pumped dish soap onto his knuckle, and worked the ring off. It was painful to watch. He grimaced, tugging and twisting until it slid over the joint with a wet pop. Then he walked back to the table, held the ring over the puddle of wine soaking into Jacob's painting, and dropped it. It hit the wet paper with a dull thud and splashed red droplets onto the white tablecloth. "I am done keeping your peace," he said, "and I am done protecting you." The silence after that wasn't normal quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the cabin. My mother stared at the ring like it was a grenade. Jessica let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "Dad, are you senile?" she scoffed, but her eyes darted around the room. "It's a painting. You're going to divorce Mom over a $5 watercolor set. That's pathetic." David didn't look at her. He walked to his travel bag, unzipped it, and pulled out a thick black leather-bound notebook. It looked old and worn, the edges softened with use. He brought it back to the table and set it down with a heavy thud. "I have been a structural engineer for 40 years, Jessica," he said calmly, and it was more terrifying than shouting. "My job is to track stress fractures, to find the cracks before the building collapses. I track failures." He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting, columns of dates and numbers. "3 years ago," he continued, tracing the first page with a finger. You told me you needed $5,000 for a business loan. You said your influencer career was taking off, but you needed equipment. Jessica crossed her arms and rolled her eyes. Yeah, and I paid you back mostly. What is this, an audit? You didn't pay back a dime, David said. But that's not the point. The point is I started tracking everything, not just the big loans. Every time your mother said she needed extra cash for groceries. Every time money was withdrawn for home repairs that never happened. Every time our savings dipped for emergencies. He turned the notebook so they could see the columns. I tracked the dates. I tracked the amounts. And then I hired a forensic accountant to track where the money actually went. Susan made a strangled sound. Her hand reached out, trembling. David, please don't do this. Not in front of everyone. Everyone needs to know, David said. Because everyone has been laughing at Sarah. Everyone has been laughing at Jacob. Everyone thinks they are weak, but they aren't weak. They are the ones paying the bill. He looked at me then, and his eyes held an apology so deep it hurt. I let this happen, Sarah. I let you think you were less than her. I let you think she was special and you were just there. But I was watching. I was counting. He flipped the page. Receipts were taped to the paper. Bank transfer confirmations. Notes in red ink. This isn't an allowance, Jessica, he said. This is a ransom. He traced a line. August 14th, 2 years ago. $12,000. You said it was a brand partnership buy-in. April 3rd last year. $8,000. You said it was medical bills. He looked up at Susan. But the biggest one was 3 years ago. The night of the Labor Day party. The one we didn't attend because you said you were sick. Susan shook her head frantically, tears pouring down her cheeks. David, stop, please. Protect the name, David repeated, and this time his voice cracked with fury. You didn't protect the name. You protected a criminal. He turned another page. A copy of a report was taped there. The $174,000 wasn't for business loans, David said. It wasn't for gifts. It was hush money. Jessica froze. The arrogance drained out of her face and left something pale and terrified behind. She looked toward the door but didn't move. 3 years ago, David said to the room, Jessica drove home drunk from a party. She hit a parked car. Then she hit a pedestrian, a 19-year-old girl walking her dog. My stomach dropped. The room spun. I remembered that period of time. Jessica had been traveling. Mom had said she was in Europe, finding herself. She didn't stop, David continued. She fled. A hit and run. Susan sobbed into her hands, rocking. You took our retirement money, David said, his voice shaking. $174,000. You paid for a lawyer to bury it. You paid a settlement to the girl's family. You paid people to keep it quiet. You told me it was a parking dispute. You told me it was handled. He slammed the notebook shut. The sound echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. You stole our future to cover up her crime. And then you let her sit here and mock a 6-year-old boy for painting a picture. You let her destroy his work because you taught her that destruction has no consequences. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't find words. David stared at her without warmth. You aren't a businesswoman. You aren't an influencer. You are a liability, and your mother is your accomplice. The family myth died in that silence. Jessica tried to rally. She stood up and smoothed her expensive dress, grabbing for the arrogance that had protected her for 33 years. She scoffed. So what? It was an accident. Mom helped me. That's what mothers do. They help, unlike you. Then she glared at David. You're jealous because Mom loves me more. David looked at her with cold, detached pity. It wasn't a father looking at a daughter. It was an engineer looking at a condemned structure. You have nothing, Jessica. He reached into the back pocket of the notebook and pulled out a folded document, placing it on the table beside the wedding ring and the ruined painting. This cabin is in my name. It was my inheritance from my father. Your mother's name is not on the deed. He flattened the paper with his palm. You have 1 hour to vacate these premises, all of you, Susan included. You can't kick us out, Susan wailed, clutching her chest. Where will I go? It's pouring rain. I don't know, David said, emotionless. Maybe you can stay with the daughter you invested so much in. He turned back to Jessica. And as for your money, as of 10 minutes ago, while you were pouring wine on my grandson's art, I froze the joint accounts. I reported the transfers as fraud pending a forensic investigation. The bank locked everything. Your credit cards, your mother's cards, the business account you used to funnel money through. Jessica grabbed her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, frantic. She opened her banking app. I watched her face collapse as the truth landed. It's declined, she whispered. And there it was, the illusion of power dying inside an empty wallet. Without the constant financial drip from my parents, her status and confidence evaporated instantly. She wasn't powerful. She was a child wearing a costume she didn't pay for. Her power was never real. It was rented, and the lease was up. Your power was rented, David said, as if reading the thought right out of the air. And the landlord is closing the building. He walked to the front door and opened it wide. The storm had broken. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the driveway into mud. Wind howled into the warm cabin. Get out, he said. Jessica looked at Uncle Mark, the same man who laughed earlier. He stared at the floorboards, suddenly too interested in the wood to meet her eyes. She looked at Susan. Susan was crying, useless, broken, unable to save anyone, even herself. Finally, Jessica looked at me. Her eyes filled with desperation, as if she just realized she was alone. Sarah, she pleaded, tell him he's crazy. You can't let him do this to me. I'm your sister. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who terrorized me for decades. I looked at my son's ruined painting and the wine stains still spreading like a bruise. I thought about the silence Jacob had learned in that chair, the silence I was finally breaking. You should hurry, I said, as cold as the rain outside. Traffic is going to be terrible. 6 months later, the light in the new apartment felt different. It wasn't the dim yellow light of the cabin or the harsh glare of the old family house. It was clean daylight streaming through big windows overlooking a city park. The place was smaller than the home my parents had shared for 40 years, but it was peaceful. No one walked on eggshells. No one listened for heavy sighs as a warning sign. No one waited for the next explosion. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, watching them. David knelt beside Jacob on a drop cloth. They were covered in sawdust. David was teaching him how to use a miter box to cut wood for a custom canvas frame. Measure twice, David said gently, patient in a way I had never seen before. Precision matters. If the frame is strong, the art is safe. Like this, Grandpa? Jacob asked, sawing carefully, tongue poking out in concentration. Exactly like that, David said, smiling. Susan lived in a small condo 2 towns over. She sent letters sometimes, long, rambling rants on expensive paper, blaming us for ruining the family image, for embarrassing her, for being cruel. I burned them in the sink without reading past the first line. She was still trying to tax us for a piece that never existed, but we had stopped paying. Jessica was working retail at a mall kiosk, selling phone cases. The fraud investigation triggered audits and legal trouble, and she was drowning in fees. She sold her car. She moved into a small studio. For the first time in her life, she faced reality without a safety net, and the fall was hard. I looked at my son. He wasn't flinching anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was making a mess with glue and wood, laughing when he spilled a little on the floor. He didn't freeze. He grabbed a rag and wiped it up because he knew no one would scream at him. In that moment, I understood the cost and the truth. We broke the family to save the people. We burned down the structure to protect the foundation. The price was heavy, but watching my father's relaxed shoulders and my son's unburdened smile, it was the best bargain I ever made. If you have ever had to break a bond to save yourself, type freedom in the comments. Let's remind each other that choosing safety, dignity, and truth is not cruelty. It is survival, and it is the beginning of peace. If you want, I can also make a second version that is shorter for TikTok or YouTube Shorts, while keeping the same plot and emotional punch.